everyone. I'm so glad that you decided to join me today for this incredible workshop. You are not your mental illness. My name is Andrea Escobar Logreda. For those of you that don't know me, I am a spiritual guide, mental health intuitive, and when I was 18, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that whole journey sent me down this healing path of reconnecting with myself, finding who I was, reconnecting with that person prior to the trauma, the shame, and everything that I went through as a child and later on growing up. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a backstory on my journey. When I was diagnosed at 18, what was being triggered were the emotions and basically everything that I suppressed when my parents got separated when I was 6. So my parents, my grandma died, and about 6 months later, my parents split. And that was really hard on me because I took that like my dad is abandoning me, while that wasn't what was actually happening. In the eyes of a 6-year-old, I looked at it like, okay, my dad is abandoning me. When I was a freshman in college, that story, that inner narrative started to replay again. I had moved to Florida, and I was going to school there so that I could rekindle this relationship with my father. And when that didn't happen, that old wound was brought up to the surface. And this time, it wasn't as easy as it had been before to kind of keep shoving everything down. I had been doing that all my life. On one end, my mom, who's amazing, she is very avoidant of her own feelings and emotions. And on the other spectrum, my dad very much is the same. He's emotionally unavailable while he's very loving. There is an aspect, again, their own story, their own trauma that was putting that on. So I grew up in that type of household. So for me, it was totally normal to avoid and not deal with my emotions. So freshman year, I could no longer do that. And fast forward a year later, when I was a sophomore, I had my first psychotic episode, and it lasted from October 2009, when I medically withdrew from school for a second time, and it lasted into January 2010, when I was hospitalized. And I was in the hospital for a few months, was quote unquote stable when I was released. And I pretty much stayed on this roller coaster of really, really high manias with psychoses, and would come crashing down after months of being on that, down to depression. And my life took a very pivotal turn when I was given a medication, the antipsychotic that I was taking. I was no longer reacting to the pill, so they gave me the extended release shot version. And while my doctor had disclosed to my mom, hey, 3% of the patients that use this medication, it doesn't work. I just want to let you know, but we're going to be fine. It turns out I fall under that 3%. So that was kind of my rock bottom moment, what I like to call. And it really set me on a new path. My mom found a psychiatrist that was starting to get into the orthomolecular kind of realm, and her approach was very much mind, body, and spirit, and not just the mind. And with her, I really learned the difference between what we want and what we actually need. I learned how to trust myself. I was constantly looking for the external world to tell me this is what you need to do, this is the right path. So really leaning into my own voice. And I learned to depend on myself with small promises each day. And I'm going to touch on that later on throughout the workshop. Last year in August, it had been 5 years that I had been off synthetic pharmaceuticals, no psychoses, no hallucinations, no depressive episodes. And that for me was a really big celebratory moment. And each year in August, I celebrate because I know that it's a celebration of coming home to me. And that's really what my practice is all about, reconnecting you with yourself prior to the trauma, prior to the abuse, prior to everything that your society, familiar, and community kind of created, and bringing you back to that authentic place. So I'm gonna, start with this first picture. And you guys can see on the left side is the guide. Then there's a mom and a daughter. And on the other side, on the far end, is me, another daughter, and then the father. My friend who was visiting from Florida fell probably 15 seconds before this picture was taken. And the mom ends up falling out, I think like maybe 15, 20 seconds after this picture was taken. And our guide jumps off to save the mom and help my friend. And at that moment, I see the two teenage daughters freak out. The dad looked back to me and he basically was like, all right, it's you and me. We got to do this. And at that moment, I really wanted to cry and not do anything and not take responsibility. But I realized it was just me. There was no one else. And if I didn't do something, I was going to end up outside of that raft. So I'm sharing this because I think it's something we all know, but it's something we need to continue to remind ourselves of. There's no one else coming. I know that sounds horrible. No one else is going to be as invested in your journey other than you. And I wanted to share that with you guys because in the past, I would have been like, I don't want to do anything. Mom, help. And I really couldn't do that. So constantly putting myself outside of my comfort zone to face certain fears really helped create that I can depend on myself. I got myself in these situations. All right. So I am going to invite you guys before we start this entire workshop, for you to please start off with this self-awareness meditation. I really wanted to create a workshop that you guys could do at your own pace and that would help you at home. So what you're going to want to do is find a quiet space. You can either do this on your bed, you can do this on a yoga mat, you can do this on the floor, whatever feels comfortable for you. But you are going to want to lay down. So you're trying to find a flat surface. And you're going to want to lay down in corpse mode. So face up, spread your arms, spread your legs, take up space. Know that you are safe. I want to bring this up. This is a very vulnerable pose. If it feels uncomfortable, I see you, I hear you, I know that a lot can come up when we've lived through a lot of trauma. Chances are we don't know how to sit in our bodies and deal with our emotions. So this is a really great step into feeling more secure and more ready to deal with things while they're happening on our day-to-day. So I would take aside 10 minutes, set a timer. If you want to listen to some nice music, you totally can. Soothing music, nothing with words. And I really want you to focus on your breathing. I know that, because it happened to me, you're probably going to get itchy. You're going to want to move. You're going to want to fidget. please try not to. The whole point of this is to notice what comes up when we're remaining still. Now, the first time I did this with my orthomolecular psychiatrist, she had to literally keep my hands down because I couldn't stay still. Chaos was way more familiar to me than stillness. And I'm sharing this with you guys because if you at all share a similar story or narrative, this is going to be uncomfortable. So set a 10-minute timer, and then jump back onto the workshop whenever you're ready. Side note, if you are activated or triggered throughout your day, this is a really great way to process whatever happened during that moment. So obviously, if you can't do it at the time, take some time later on in the day for yourself to sit with it, lay with it, and really allow whatever emotions came up prior to release. Okay, so this whole workshop is based on debunking the mental illness kind of theories that are out there and the causes of mental illnesses. So when you break that down, if you look up on Google and you're like, okay, what is a mental illness? What are the causes of mental illness or psychiatric disorders? What is bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and etc.? A lot of the times when they break it down, it's going to be caused by our biology, our genetics, and our environment. And in today's workshop, I'm going to really break that down, how our biology and our genetics are completely affected by our environment. So we're not victims to our biology, genetics, and our environment. This is really to empower you and make you realize, okay, cool. So these are facts. All right, now how can I take that based on my current reality? And I know that this is something that can be a little bit hard to digest sometimes. We have been taught and we have been told by the media, by doctors, by pharma, by Western medicine that this is the way and we need this. And I really want to take that from you need to listen to them and more of, wow, I can gather this information for myself and make an educated decision for me, not because you're telling me that you know best for me. All right, so I'm going to start off with the genetics aspect of it all. So starting off, we're going to talk about epigenetics and mental illness. So what is epigenetics? So in biology, epigenetics is the study of the modification that directly affects the expression of genes. So in other words, our genes play an important role in our health, our behaviors, and our environment is affecting those genes. So the type of lifestyle that you're living is going to affect the expression of your genes, how they work. So when we're talking about psychiatric diseases, mental illnesses, it is believed from an epigenetic standpoint that the cause of a mental illness or psychiatric disease is a combination of that genetic vulnerability and that environmental influence. So when does this genetic vulnerability happen? There's certain periods in our life when we're going to be more susceptible and more vulnerable to these environmental influences. So the first one's going to be during gestation. So when you're literally in your mom's belly, that is such a big genetic vulnerable moment. So if your mom is under stress, if she's living in a chaotic space, if she's enduring her own trauma, remember that you're literally getting fed through her. So if she's stressed, she's going to produce more of these stress hormones to keep her relaxed. If she's, in a traumatic environment, again, a lot of these stress hormones are going to be coming up. And that's going to be fed into you. So you are already going to have more cortisol, more adrenaline in your body when you don't need it because of the state of your mom. So if your mom's eating a lot of junk food, processed food, again, that's going to affect the baby. So gestation period is a very, very vulnerable time. Then that early postnatal period, so right after giving birth, is going to be a very vulnerable time for the baby. Again, I'm a preemie myself, so I know that for me, I thought my abandonment womb started with my dad. No, it goes further back than that. My mom was going in to get just a regular checkup, and they basically said, hey, you don't produce any more amniotic fluid, so you're going to have to go into labor now. I was then in the NICU unit for 3 months. So I didn't have that physical contact with my mom for 3 months. She didn't breastfeed me. So there's a lot of abandonment from a infant standpoint there. And again, that's all gonna be in the body. And I'll touch on this later as we get into polyvagal theory. So that early postnatal period is very, very vulnerable to genetic. That early postnatal period is very vulnerable to our environment. And again, it's going to happen during any time of hormonal rearrangement. So typically this happens when you're a teenager, you're going through puberty a little bit earlier. This again happens for women when they're going through menopause. But right now, because we're being affected by so much in our day-to-day, this hormonal rearrangement can actually happen more than we think it does. Anytime that you're going through a really stressful time, again, think about it like postpartum depression, right? So there's a hormonal rearrangement there. So postpartum depression happens. So if all of a sudden you're going through something last year, 2020, there was a very big and chaotic time for everyone as a collective. So as a collective, there was a lot of hormonal rearrangement happening, which means that we're going to be way more vulnerable to what was happening in our environment. And sadly, the majority of the influences from our environment last year were not positive. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of, oh my God, what's going to happen? We were really being forced to face with the fact that we're not immortal, and a lot of other things were popping up. So that is going to be a hormonal rearrangement again. And we're not typically going through gestation, early postnatal period, or any, you're not going through menopause, you're not going through puberty. It's just, there's so much going on that your biology, your genetics are going to be influenced by your environment. It's going to play a role in everything else. So, it's said that more than half of the diagnosable mental health problems start before the age of 14. And I think that's interesting that if we could really start to look at mental health as a whole instead of mental illness, and look at mental health as looking at that our mental health is going to be vulnerable to our environment, would really help us address a lot of these issues way earlier in life, and not to the point where we need to start giving medication all the time. But that's just my personal opinion. All right, so kind of going back to epigenetics. On a biological level, our genes and environment communicate with each other. How does this happen? So epigenetics process regulates how genes are expressed when they're switched on and off. So the best way that I could describe this is, imagine you have like a hall, right? With a bunch of switches, and they turn on different lights and different electronics in your house, right? This hall, and it has a bunch of flips. And the house has a couple turned on, one in the bathroom, one in the bedroom, and one in the kitchen. And then all of a sudden it starts to rain, And the house is like, oh my God, we need to adapt to the rain. It's getting dark, so we need to adapt to that, right? So start switching on other switches that wouldn't normally be on as a way to adapt to the environment. So that's essentially what's happening with our genes. Our environment is basically saying, hey, adapt to this. This isn't something that we're used to. And then inside, these little workers are like, oh, okay, this is happening. So we need to turn on this one. And, let's turn off this one so that we can preserve more energy and protect ourselves and all of this. Like, we don't realize how smart our bodies and minds are. And they're going to start switching things on and off in order to adapt to whatever's happening currently. So the epigenetics dictate which bits of genetic sequence should be read or ignored at different times in our life and across different cells in our bodies. So it's not necessarily that your environment's like, oh, get rid of this gene. It's more of like your environment saying, hey, we don't need this gene. We need this one to turn on. So turn this one off because it's not really useful, but turn this one on because it's very useful. And they're going to coordinate our biological functions, such as, again, hormonal, metabolic, our immune, and neural changes across our lifespan. So kind of going back to last year, our immunity is going to be affected by our environment. So if you're constantly under stress and you're anxious and you're in this fear state, your immunity is going to be affected. You're going to be more vulnerable to getting sick because your environment is affecting your genes. So when these switches are disrupted, when they're not working in the way that they're supposed to, and I don't like using that word because what does that really mean? But when your switches are kind of like wonky, they're just turning on and off, trying to adapt to this very unknown environment, that's when we have negative consequences in our health, and they can manifest as cancer, autoimmune disease, mental illnesses, and so much more. Again, the exposure to toxins, stress, and unhealthy diets are going to affect our epigenetics and our body. So a little bit of some facts that I found really interesting, and I'll kind of let you guys read through these. And one that I found the most kind of just like, wow, was the children of women who were pregnant during the Dutch winter famine after World War II have increased risk of obesity. So the environmental factor obviously was hunger. We're not getting fed. So inside your the little people that are, I'm calling them little people, they're not really little people, but that are switching the genes on and off are saying, oh no, we're not going to get food. So we need to preserve and save everything. So instead of, hey, let's, digest our food and get rid of it, it's like, no, let's hoard everything. We need to keep it because we don't know when we're going to get fed again. And that led to an influence that all of the women, not all of the women, but the majority of the women that had babies during this time, their babies were prone to obesity. Why? Again, that environmental factor was hunger. So their genes were switched on and turned off to now adapt to that current reality. So I thought that was really interesting. Another one that I thought was really interesting was prenatal stress predisposes the female offspring to binge eating like behaviors. And I thought that was just really interesting. Here's just to show how much our environment can really change our genes, and it's a good and a bad thing. And I say a good and a bad thing because obviously if it's stress, it's not going to be a positive outcome. But if you start making changes like stop smoking cigarettes, then it's going to be a positive outcome. So when you smoke cigarettes, the AHRR gene, smokers tend to have less DNA methylation than non-smokers. After quitting, though, former smokers were able to increase their DNA methylation and reach the level similar to non-smokers. There was a study of this guy who smoked for like 40 years and he quit. And after, I think it was like 3.5 years, he was able to reach the similar levels to non-smokers. So that just really shows that when we change the environment, it can go either way. It doesn't always have to be negative. All right. So I'll let you guys kind of sit with that. If you want to pause it, this is a really great moment to pause. We're going to jump into orthomolecular next. So, orthomolecular psychiatry. Before I jump into this, I'm going to share why I have so much appreciation for orthomolecular psychiatrists and psychiatry in general. So, when we're talking about the body, every specialty, there's going to be tests done involving that organ. When we're talking about psychiatry, though, it's the only specialty that we don't test anything on the organ. So there's no blood tests that you can take. There's no scans that you can get that are going to say, oh yeah, confirmed, you have depression. Confirmed, you're bipolar. Confirmed, you have this. There's nothing that you can do for that. So for me, it was really interesting that in psychiatry, you're like, okay, let me treat you, but you're not actually considering the organ involved. Versus when we're talking about orthomolecular psychiatry, they are involving the entire body, and that really resonated with me. So ortho comes from the Greek word orthos, and it means right or straight, and then molecular, concerning the molecules. So this concept popped up in 1927 with Paul J. Ryder. He was treating his schizophrenic patients with naturally occurring substances in the body. And I think it was like 250 patients that he was treating. He had like 80 of them had really, really great success. Not enough for us to be like, whoa, life-changing, but definitely planted a seed. Then in 1968, Linus Pauling, who's the founder of orthomolecular psychiatry, discussed treatment of psychiatric conditions with substances that naturally occur in the body. So vitamins, minerals, enzymes, coenzymes, amino acids, and so on. One thing that I think is really cool is that the approach is not to correct the deficiency, it's to alter the body's chemical environment. So kind of going back to epigenetics, if you've been like this for 30, 40, 50 years, trying to rewrite 30, 40 years overnight's not going to be the easiest thing. But when you can, all right, let's, on a genetic standpoint, we're gonna go and we're gonna rewire that aspect. But on a biological standpoint, we're actually just gonna switch everything so that it fits where we're currently at. It's more digestible for the patient to have results than when you're trying to literally correct everything. And you basically can fry the nervous system like that because you're just doing too many things at once. Kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, why I'm such a fan of orthomolecular psychiatry, we're really trying to get to that biochemical root cause. So that root cause so that we can give you long-lasting effects. And I'm saying give you like I'm an orthomolecular psychiatrist on that. And I want to just make a side note. Medication has a time and place. I used it for a really long time, and I'm sure if you're hallucinating, please take the medication. My theory, my relationship with medication is that there's a time and place, but it's not something that we should be relying on long term. The side effects that it can cause the body, there's a lot of negative ones, and on top of that, medication is quick and it makes the symptoms docile. It doesn't actually like get to the root cause. So a lot of the times you think you're feeling better, but then if anything brings you back, like triggers that trauma and brings you back to that state, then again, doctors are in this frenzy trying to find a combination of medication that works, versus if we can use medication to kind of keep the symptoms docile and then work towards that biochemical root cause and altering our environment, you're going to notice that after a few months or maybe a year or two or a few years, you're not going to need the medication and you're feeling really great. And if you are brought, triggered, or activated and brought back to that traumatic time, you won't fall like you did last time. Instead, you're going to be kind of like, oh, okay, all right, now let me lean into my new practices and tools. All right. So again, if you guys want to go ahead and stop the workshop, this would be a really great time. We're going to jump into polyvagal theory next. So polyvagal theory. Now, why I wanted to touch on polyvagal theory, it really talks about trauma, the effect that trauma has on our body, and why I believe that talk therapy isn't the answer that we once thought it was. And hey, I've been going to therapy since I was 12, so you know it played a really big role in my life. But it wasn't until I started to work with an orthomolecular psychiatrist that therapy was able to actually take more of just a kind of background role to a more prominent, all right, I can now address these, whatever's going on. And why I say that is, and again, we'll touch on this a little bit more, but we often think, okay, I can go to therapy, I'll be good, I'll talk about it, it's great. Here's the thing, guys, we can't talk trauma out of the body. So our bodies, our brains, going back to, and we're going to jump on this in a little while, that subconscious mind, our subconscious mind takes care of all the things that we don't consciously have to think about to do. So that's how we're able to digest our food, how to breathe, how to, all of our organs are functioning, you know, how our brain is communicating with our organs and our organs are communicating with our brains. That all is in that very old part of our brain, that subconscious part of our brain. So if we don't, on a subconscious level, address said trauma, it's going to continue to live in you. And again, your muscles are like a recording device. It's literally recording everything. It's deep into your cells. So you can talk about it all you want, but you can't talk trauma out of the body. You need to move it out, whether that's with yoga, running, exercise, shaking. And I'm gonna kind of just share this. If you go onto YouTube and you look up jaguar and deer shaking, you'll see that the deer will play dead so that the jaguar doesn't eat it. And once the jaguar leaves, the deer will eventually get up. I'm sorry, it wasn't a deer, it was a gazelle, my bad. The gazelle will get up and she starts to shake, and she's essentially shaking the trauma out and then moves on. And if you pay attention to this, animals do this all the time. So they're literally telling us, hey, this is how you shake off what happened. So I've noticed that a lot of the times I will start to shake. And it wasn't something that I realized until I dove into polyvagal theory. I'm like, oh, there's a reason for my shaking. It was internally, my body was like, we need to get this off, because if we don't get it out, it's going to stay in here. And we're going to continue to relive it over and over and over again. All right. So polyvagal theory. It was funded by Stephen Porges out of his experiments with the vagus nerve in 2011. And then Peter Levine kept adding to it. The polyvagal theory basically talks about the autonomic system, and it consists of three parts: our dorsal sympathetic, our dorsal parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest system. And then we have the sympathetic, which is our fight or flight. And then we have the ventral vagal system, which is the newest. Each system is going to have its own functions and cause the body to react differently before, during, and after trauma or traumatic or stressful events. So the fight or flight response in the sympathetic nervous system what it's really going to do is going to prepare your body to fight or flee. So what do you need in order to fight or run? You're gonna need weight. Your blood's gonna start pumping faster. Your heartbeat's gonna increase. Your blood pressure is gonna go up. Your body's basically stealing different energy resources from different areas of the body, saying, okay, we gotta do this now, because if we don't do this now, we're gonna die. So we gotta go. If there's no place to run, and I'm going to use this as an example. Think about it like this. Our bodies are literally programmed to run from a tiger or something that's chasing us out in the wild, right? Back to those caveman years. It doesn't know the difference between someone actively yelling at you and calling you stupid, which can be really traumatic, or a bear coming after you. So since your body doesn't know the difference, if you can't actually run or fight, and the best way to explain this is think about it. Okay, I wouldn't want this on anybody. I haven't experienced this, but this was a video I saw earlier this week. But you're held up at gunpoint. If you don't feel like you can run from them or fight them, chances are you're going to just freeze, right? So if there's no place for you to run or for you to fight, then your sympathetic nervous system will cause you to just kind of freeze, detach, dissociate, right? So the ventral vagal is literally pulling up brake, like emergency brake. We got to stop this. What are we going to do? We need to stop all of this excess blood pressure and blood and, the heartbeat and all of this, because we're not going anywhere. So we need to put a pump on this. So when you're in that freeze state, normally if your body knows how to self-regulate, you will kick yourself back into that parasympathetic. If you don't, then chances are you're going to stay in that freeze state. So you're trapped in that trauma. And anytime that anything reminds you of that state, you're just going to either want to fight or flight, or you're going to freeze again. So stress puts us in that sympathetic fight or flight. We're not meant to live here, guys. And if we spend an excess amount of time here, then we're basically, it's like, think about it like this, like your body now doesn't know the difference, and it's constantly like trying to fight or flee something. So it's always like, okay, I always gotta, am I leaving? Am I fighting? What am I gonna do? And it's in this kind of chaotic state. So going back to the vagus nerve, there's 12, actually I'm gonna go back real quick. There are 12 cranial nerves. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve, cranial nerve, and it's controlling our inner nerve center, aka the parasympathetic nervous system. So think of the vagus nerve like this big electrical cord that has a bunch of fibers inside of it. So cord, bunch of fibers inside of it, right? So you have a bunch of fibers inside of it. Some of the fibers are sending information from the brain to the body, and these are called motor fibers. And some of the fibers are sending information from the body organs to the brain, and those are called sensory fibers. Why is this important? All right, so There is a protective covering on the vagus nerve, and it's going to only be on one part of the vagus nerve. It doesn't cover the entire part. So there's two main branches in the vagus nerve, and it's going to be the myelinated branch, which has the protective covering, and that speeds up the communication of the signals from the brain to the organs and from the organs to the brain. The unmyelinated part of the nerve doesn't have any protective covering, and that's going to be above the diaphragm. So the unmyelinated vagus nerve is gonna is where our parasympathetic is composed of, and the myelinated vagus nerve is located above the diaphragm, and it has two branches to the face, the head, the lung, and the heart. So this is responsible for the expression of the upper portion of the face. And now this is really interesting because it's also is responsible for our voice and the middle ear muscles. So why is it important? Why are these middle ear muscles important? When you feel safe, the myelinated vagus nerve is running the show and everything is running smoothly and you feel good and you're like, yep, and you can hear and everything's functioning just the way it's supposed to. When we are in a fear state, when we feel unsafe, we literally cannot function with the myelinated vagus nerve. So we become expressionless. It's going to affect that upper part of the face. The middle ear muscles lose their tone and you become sensitive to low frequency predator sounds. The loss in tone makes it difficult to hear human voices, and it can make background noises really overwhelming. So a lot of people, again, with trauma, they have a hard time being in really big exposed spaces because to them, a lot of the times this middle ear muscle has lost their tone and they're in this fear state. So things to kind of look at. Our bodies are literally like protecting us from all these things and they're adapting quickly. So this is, remember how I mentioned that gestation period, that it's so important. Why? So developmentally, the number of myelinated vagal fibers increase from 23 to 28 weeks of gestation until birth, when the numbers are the same as that of a teenager. So this just kind of shows where that genetic vulnerability is and how it can be affected by our environment. So the prenatal infections and stress affect the development of the myelinated vagus nerve. So again, if you're in a stressful, chaotic environment, you're going to affect the development of the myelinated vagal fibers, which is going to affect everything. What's happening in our bodies, our physiological state influences our behaviors and feeling state, thus our ability to interact with others, perform basic functions, etc. So jumping from there, we're going to now go into brainwaves, what brainwaves have to do with everything, the subconscious mind versus the conscious mind. And at the end, I'll have some journaling prompts for you guys to dive deeper into that inner dialogue and really start noticing, okay, this is my kind of automatic programming. Where do I want to shift? So this is a great time again, if you want to take a break, press pause, you can catch up again. All right, so we're going to talk about brainwaves. So I've recently gotten into this in the last like 6 months to 9 months, and it really blew my mind how much brainwaves affect our mental health, our brain, and everything. So think of brainwaves as trains at different speeds connecting at different places in your brain. And in this case, the train is a series of electrical pulses. Each of the waves has a different speed and it's measured in hertz, Hz. And each wave has a different function. So I'll let you guys kind of read this on your own. I'm just gonna breeze through them really quickly. Delta, it's gonna be measured at 0 to 4 hertz, and it occurs in deep sleep and abnormal processes. What's really interesting is it's dominant in infants up to a year of age and present in stages of 3 and 4 of sleep. So why is this important? You're not in a conscious state when you're in delta. It happens in deep sleep, which is saying that infants up to a year of age that are in delta are literally just soaking in everything. They're not consciously making like, oh, that's not okay. Dad looks mad. Like they can't process that. And then from delta, we go on to theta. And theta is going to be measured at 3.5 to 7.7 hertz. And it's our connection to creativity, our intuition, daydreaming, fantasizing, and our memories, emotions, and sensations. Really cool thing about theta is that kids, after they leave the delta state, that dominant delta state, they're in theta dominantly until about 7 to 13. And why is it going to change? Well, if you're being nurtured to stay in this very intuitive, creative, kind of daydreamy state, then chances are you're going to be in theta until you're 13. But if you're in an environment where you're like, no, you got to grow up, no, you can't do this, then chances are you're going to snap out of that theta and hit alpha a lot earlier. So alpha is going to be measured at 8 to 12 hertz, and we peak at alpha at 10 hertz. So good, healthy alpha production promotes mental resourcefulness, aids in the ability to mentally coordinate, which is really cool. And it's going to be the bridge between conscious and subconscious. Then we go on to beta, and beta is going to be 12 hertz and up, and it reflects the desynchronized active brain tissue. So this is a dominant rhythm in those who are alert, anxious, or have their eyes open. This is a state we're in when our eyes are open, we're listening, we're thinking during analytical problem solving, judgment, decision making, and or processing information from the world around us. So chances are, if I'm in beta right now, just because I need to in order to be able to do this, and you guys, as you're listening, since you need to listen, chances are you're also in beta. Gamma is going to be above 30 hertz, and it's the only frequency group found in every part of the brain, which is really awesome. So when our brain needs to simultaneously process information from different areas, that's when we hit gamma. All right, so what I found interesting when I was doing all this research about brainwaves is that individuals diagnosed with ADD naturally increase their delta activity when they're trying to focus. So when they're trying to get into that, when you're supposed to actually be in beta, you're naturally going into delta. So delta's response is going to restrict the ability to focus and maintain attention. Remember that delta's that deep sleep, guys. So it feels almost as if the brain is locked in a drowsy state. And then theta is perfectly normal in children up to 13 years of age, like I mentioned earlier. When the rhythms appear to function normally, they're going to mediate and promote adaptive behaviors such as learning and memory. So when our brain waves are functioning normal, they're going to mediate and promote adaptive behaviors. We're going to learn, we're going to memorize things. Under unusual circumstances, that's when you start saying, I have really bad memory, or I can't focus, and all these things. Our brain waves are not functioning as they're supposed to, and they're not able to lean into their roles, essentially. So the alpha rhythms are reported to be derived from the white matter of the brain. the white matter connects all of the other parts of the brain together. And alpha is a common state for the brain and occurs when a person is alert and not actively processing information. So alpha is linked to being an extrovert, creativity, mental work. All right. So going into the subconscious versus the conscious brain. So our subconscious brain was filled with programs prior to when we enter that conscious state. So when we were able to go in and out of beta and alpha and enter that conscious state, because remember that alpha is that connection from the subconscious to the conscious mind. So when we're entering that state, then we're more in a logical, like, oh, okay, I understand that. Oh, I can make sense of this. I can consciously interpret this information. Your subconscious, think about it as, I don't know if anyone remembers those CD players that used to exist. This was way before we had iPods and all of that. But yeah, there was a big CD player. And I remember the one we had when I was growing up, it had like 6 CDs that you can put in at once. So literally think of that. You have your subconscious has a bunch of programs that it took to kind of adapt and know how to respond in your environment. So it was like, oh, okay, I learned this at home. I learned this from my community. I learned this at school. I learned this from my friends. And then anytime that it's present with something that is associated with this, your subconscious mind is going to say, okay, this is how we act. We humans like the path of least resistance. So our subconscious mind makes it so that we don't have to actually think, oh, when I see a door, how do I open it? Our subconscious mind from when we were little was like, you see a door, you turn the knob and you enter it. But I'm sure if you see a door that has a handle that isn't like yours, you're like, wait, what is this? So example for this, Tesla. If you see a Tesla, you don't open the door like you normally do with every other car. So think about it like this. If you've only seen, trucks that have a handle that you pull and all of a sudden you're given a Tesla, you're like, what do? I don't know how to do this. You're no longer in your subconscious. Now you're in your conscious brain trying to figure out, how do I open this door? So in order to not constantly be in how do we do this, we lean into that subconscious part. And that can be positive and negative. Why can it be positive and negative? Because if you learned when you were little that art is bad, because you heard your parents always saying, so-and-so's kid thinks that they're going to be able to make money as an artist. So you're registering in a subconscious way, oh, art doesn't make me money. And look, my parents are making fun of this kid for wanting to pursue this type of lifestyle. Okay, that's not acceptable. So in order for me to be accepted and valued and loved in my familial environment, I need to match their thoughts. So if maybe you didn't want to be an artist, but you feel pulled to that creative part, now you're denying that. And on a subconscious level, you don't even realize why you're denying that. And it's because you picked it up a long time ago that it wasn't acceptable. So here's the really interesting part. Our subconscious mind, guys, and our conscious mind, we can only process I think it's per second. Our conscious can only process 20 to 52 things of information, versus our subconscious can process per second 40 million. So our subconscious, think about it like this really cool, updated computer that has a bunch of memory and a bunch of space and a bunch of hard drive, and then your conscious brain like an iPad. You can't put as much stuff, or a phone. You can't put as much stuff on your phone as you could into a computer that has a bunch of memory and a bunch of RAM and a bunch of hardware space. So why am I bringing this up? And we're going to dive into this in a little second. When you're reprogramming the subconscious mind, it's really, you're doing a lot of mental work because you're not in that conscious state. You're in that unconscious state, that subconscious state, and you're trying to reprogram things that have been set in place for God knows how long. And I say this because, again, our subconscious mind was formed when we were from the age of literally when you were in your mom's belly, gestation period, till about 13. And you're still, even now, you're still putting things into your subconscious brain. Every time that you consistently do something repeatedly, it's going to be put into that subconscious brain. How did you learn your timetables? You didn't learn your timetables. You weren't born knowing them. And if you were, that's awesome. But chances are it was repetition and consistency, 4 times 4, 4 times 4, 4 times 4, until it was engraved in your brain. And now I'm actually thinking, what is 4 times 4? All right. So that's how you know that I'm like, my subconscious brain did not memorize my multiplication tables. All right. And I wanted to use a car example to give you guys even more context on the subconscious brain. So this is how powerful it is. When, say that you're driving to work, are you actively paying attention to the road? And are you seeing the cars pass by you, the trees, the sky, the birds? Or because you've been to work so many times, you're listening to music, you're listening to a podcast, you're talking to someone, you're on the phone, and you're doing all these things that you don't have to consciously be aware of what's going on. Your subconscious mind is literally on autopilot, taking you from point A to point B. But now, let's say that the car in front of you hits their brakes, and all of a sudden you have to hit your brakes. That wasn't your subconscious mind. Yeah, on a level, it was like, oh, fear. Okay, we got to do this. But it was now your conscious mind took over and was like, all right, what do we got to do? You're no longer in that subconscious autopilot. So we live about 88% of the time to 95% of the time in autopilot. It means that a lot of the behaviors that we're in are not something that we're consciously choosing. Think about it like this. How many times it's New Year's, you are like, I'm going to make all these great goals and intentions. I'm going to run. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then after a week or two, you don't do it again. Why? That autopilot has been programmed for how long? So you're literally trying to compete 88 to 95% with a small percentage. Who do you think is going to win? This or this little tiny thing? The bigger one's going to win. So when we are trying to recreate new patterns, new behaviors, we literally have to reprogram the subconscious brain. And this is going to happen through neuroplasticity. And it literally, the brain changes and shapes throughout our lifetime. So this is debunking that old notion that our brain is fixed at childhood and it stays that way. Our habits, our established way of thinking, feeling, doing can be rewired by forming new neural pathways in the brain and weakening old ones. So think about it like a hiking trail. So the established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing things are the already the trail, the paths that are already have been walked on. You can see them clearly. But now if I told you, I want you to not take the trail, but I still want to meet you at the top of the mountain, you're not going to know how to get there. There's no trail. You're literally forging your own path. And then when we get up there, I'm like, is there any way that you can form that into a new trail? How many times do you think you're going to have to pass that path before it is now a new trail, a new path that people are going to actively see when they're going? So that's going to happen through consistency and repetition, continually showing up and repeating the same thing over and over again. I say this to a lot of people, especially when I'm working with clients. We try to take in too many things at once. and then we're literally frying our nervous system because our nervous system's trying to change all these subconscious programming, and it's tired at the end of the day. So that's why I am very big on small promises that you make, small intentional promises that you make every single day. That's how I started to really learn to trust myself. That's how I started reprogramming my subconscious brain. That's how I really was able to create long lasting change, small little promises, not overwhelming myself by trying to do 20 new things at once. So, the easiest way that I would say to do this is start off with the smallest thing, and it's water, guys, literally water. So, I sleep, I don't have it with me right now, but I sleep with right next to my bed, there's a thermos that I fill up the night before with warm water. It's actually hot in the morning, it's so warm though. Before I get out of bed or anything, I drink my water. And that's my way of like, all right, I showed up for myself before anything. Before I got up, before I gave my cat food, before anything, I am taking a moment for myself to drink this water. Now I'm in a place where while I'm drinking the water, I say 3 things I'm grateful for. So when I'm working with clients, I very much ask them to start off with one small step. And this is the easiest one. We all need to drink more water. Such a simple step. So what I would recommend again is taking a thermos, not a plastic one that is safe for hot water, and filling it up the night before. You can even squeeze a little bit of lemon juice in. It's going to still be warm. I love it. I live in Colorado. Winters are cold in the morning, so I can warm my body up before I get up, and it makes it way more cozy and not so, oh my God, I'm freezing. So, how do we reprogram the subconscious brain? So, repetition and consistency. So, if you're, we can start by inner talk. It was developed by Eldon Taylor, and it reprograms our subconscious mind by targeting subliminal negative input we receive on a daily basis. Binaural beats is a really great way, and it's a dichotic listening technique in which a sound is played at lower frequencies to stimulate the brain. And again, hitting different parts of our brain waves, which is going to give us altered states of consciousness. Another way is meditation, discipline, consistency. I really, really recommend Insight Timer for free meditation. It's a really great app. And then one that I don't have noted on here is neuro feedback. Neurofeedback is a really great way to reprogram the subconscious brain. I'm starting to work with different practitioners so that I can bring this up to you guys and make it more accessible for everyone, because I know that it's not something that everyone has access to. But if you feel called, I would definitely look up neurofeedback, NEUROFEEDBACK. And there's a lot of wonderful practitioners and a lot of really great research on neurofeedback. Essentially, you're using through sight and auditory, you're reprogramming the subconscious brain. You're bringing the brain into different states of consciousness so that you can reprogram certain behaviors, certain thoughts, certain fears, phobias. It's miraculous. All right. So, what is your inner narrative? These are the journal prompts that I've used in my own journey, that I gift to clients. This is a really great way to really get to know what's going on in that subconscious program. We're not going to be able to be aware of everything, but it's a great way to start that process of, all right, what's that autopilot? What's that inner narrative? Does it even resonate with me? Or is this something that I learned again from my family? Did I pick this up from school? Did I pick this up from my community? Was this something that society taught me? Does it really resonate with me? And start really tackling all these bigger questions so that then you can get into that process of, all right, let's start reprogramming little by little. So I invite you guys to use these journal prompts and the ones on the next page. and see what comes up. And what I would recommend is, depending on what theme you start noticing. So if it's a lot of inner child or a lot of shadow. So inner child is, there's a lot of things popping up from my childhood. Then when you go to meditate, do an inner child meditation, or if there's a lot of shadow, denied aspects that you're not accepting within yourself, then do a shadow meditation. Again, a really great thing to do is put on some binaural beats while you're journaling. It's gonna kind of hit the brain waves, and it can make you fluctuate between different states, and you can access different parts of information that you normally don't have access to. All right. Well, my friends, it was an absolute pleasure with you guys today. I can't. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you guys, walking you through this. Feel free to reach out to me if you would love more support on one-on-one support. I would love to work with all of you. And if you are interested in working with an orthomolecular psychiatrist, I do have a few physicians that I can recommend. And if you are interested in neurofeedback, again, I have a few practitioners that I can recommend for you. Have a beautiful, beautiful day. Remember, you are worthy, and all the information that you're looking for is right inside. All right, my loves, have a magical day. I'll talk to you soon.